Women's Roles in the Nicaraguan Revolution Against Machismo by Jonathan Newton. Machismo and its Principles. The word machismo, or macho, meaning male in Spanish, and basically just refers to masculine pride. And it comes from the feeling of men being superior, not only being superior in terms of being the head of the household, but also the fact that they have certain responsibilities that are laid out as being male. And it's very prevalent in Latin American popular culture by the likes of people like luchadors and bullfighters and pop culture characters like Zorro and rancheros. And it also applies to self-reliance and is an exaggerated masculinity. So puffed chest, walking with extreme swagger, and it, he has the responsibility to provide for protect, and defend his family. It is expected that men possess great bravery and courage and strength, wisdom, and leadership. And when kids are young, they are trained to grow up in a world like this with certain characters that they see doing these things. And we could also argue that there's actually positive things to machismo principles, which is that it teaches altruism and teaches boys that they should be brave. And in the older times, maybe this was appropriate because if there was a marauder coming into your field or something, and you had to defend it, or from farming or take over or other various things, it would be very important for you to have this ability of bravery and soul ability to defend. And it also teaches men to be brave, maybe for that of fighting in wars or other things that will require such extreme bravery. But the negatives of this is it perpetrates these cycles of violence. And not just violence against women in society, but also domestic and sexual violence. And it being appropriate for men to like beat their wives, and also the lack of divorce, children in and out of wedlock, and it allows sweeping standards for these gender roles, because where you have a defined male culture, you also have a heavily defined female culture, like very innocent and very untouched. And it actually leads to sexual problems throughout Latin America, and we could argue that it still kind of does, because it perpetrates homosexual orientation, and it also leads to increased things of sexual STDs and diseases, because it's considered a man's responsibility to have sex as much as he wants to, or as dangerously, unprotectedly, perhaps, as he wants. So women's roles in the Nicaraguan Revolution. Sandinista forces, there was certainly a high percentage of women involved. Now, obviously not in as much of the male role involved as perhaps their male counterparts, but they made up one of the largest proportions of females in revolutionary forces during that time. And they were communicators and essentially assisted their husbands to join the revolution. And a lot of them were very brave guerrilla fighters. And they fought against the oppressive regime of, the thing is that they not only fought based on just themselves, but they also fought for the rights of things like children, because they had birthed those children, and then it was considered their responsibility to take care of them, and solely their responsibility. And things like not being allowed to have breaks to lactate their children, or also other things like nurturing laws that were eventually put into place during the Sandistas, which was basically saying that it had to be the male's responsibility to also take care of the family, like in terms of financially, because for a long time, all the wages of all women and children were expected to be given to their husbands. And on both sides, there was women involved in the forces, also in the Contra forces, and quite a bit fewer numbers, only about 7%. And most of them were natives who were dissatisfied with the Sandistas and other various people mistreated by them. But these people joined for personal versus ideological reasons. basically just being dissatisfied with the regime, not because of Contras wanted to put it into place. And the example of the final like blow to this movement was when Valita Chamorro, the only female president of Nicaragua, and also the only officially elected president of Nicaragua, and she was defeated basically in Nicaragua's only free election, and she was very conservative, and she was not well liked by a lot of women because she opposed things like abortion and lots of other feminist things that they hoped that she would implement. And how does these new roles contrast with machismo principles and their effects? The examples for these participations are obviously traditionally in male cultures, but it showed women as brave fighters and equals within this fight for liberation. And it exposed certain connections between minorities and also the women's problems. Because the fight for liberation could not have been done by male presence, and it was especially useful to have these females involved. And it helped establish things on the male spectrum as well, because it helped multiple different countries realize that this is a way of revolutionizing. And also, for example, places like Saudi Arabia and other things realize that helping women makes their governments appear more free and less controlled, because that's a very important aspect of seeming like a free country. And it also led to the election of this female president over Daniel Ortega. And she abandoned many women, leading to Ortega's actually still ongoing presidency. Some people would argue tyranny. And it's also very interesting how these things continue to affect the government of Nicaragua.